Welcome to the Vortex Nation podcast, brought to you by lovers of hunting, shooting, public lands, the Second Amendment, and good food.
All right, what's going on, everybody? I am super pumped about our upcoming podcast. I don't have Jim with me. It's like losing a damn limb, I tell you. But I'm still super excited about what we're going to talk about today. I've got my pen handy. I've got my notepad out. I am ready to rock and roll and learn a lot because we've got the dream team here. We've got Ryan Lampers and Remi Warren, and we're going to be talking about a subject that I'm pretty confident is near and dear to their hearts, and that's early season archery mule deer. When we were first talking about kicking this off, we're like, oh, we're going to do everything mule deer. And then once it got to thinking about it, it's like, whoa, that is a broad topic. That would be like 19 different podcasts. It'd be the best podcast ever, but might get a little long. So we've narrowed the scope, and we're going, like I said, early season, archery mule deer, really cool hunt. Actually, a hunt that I've never done, hence my note-taking that's about to take place. But always been on the radar, and I think there's a lot of pluses to it. And basically, this is where I jump off and let you guys just start talking about it. So, but I guess, just to kick it off, I mean, for those who may not know, let's have you guys introduce yourselves a little bit. And if they don't know, they can crawl out from under that rock and get a little sunlight. But let's, Ryan, we'll start from you. We'll go right to left, at least my right, and maybe tell people a little bit about who you are and kind of what you got going on.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Ryan Lampers. If there's one of us that people don't know, it's going to be me. I think everybody knows Remi Warren. But, lifelong hunter. My wife and I, we do a podcast called Hunt, Harvest, Health. One of my biggest passions is food, hunting, gardening, and everything in that realm. And, we're here talking about mule deer today, and that is by far my favorite. There's just something about mule deer that is in my blood. I absolutely love hunting from early season archery to mid-season to late season. I just love every aspect of mule deer and a whole host of different states. So Washington native, I now reside in Montana. I feel like I've upgraded significantly. I've got a few more options living in Montana now that I'm there. So yeah, in a nutshell, I'm just absolutely love hunting, but specifically love mule deer hunting.
That's all. I mean, I know like whenever I talk to you about mule deer, like you love mule deer hunting, which I do want to ask because we're both Washington natives from the west side of the state. How did it not become blacktails? Did you ever chase blacktails while you're over there?
I know. I get questions all the time about how was the blacktail hunting, and I feel a little guilty. Like I should know this, right? But I've never been a blacktail guy. When my dad first started me out, it was a little bit of blacktail hunting, but it was a whole lot of bird hunting. And honestly, I didn't kill my first deer till I was 14 years old. And it happened to be that one trip where my dad was like, all right, everything in the truck. We headed east of the mountains in Washington up and over the Cascades. And it happened to be a mule deer trip in a wilderness area. And, and I got my first buck. It was a small 4-point. It's a crazy story how that all came to be. I probably shouldn't even be here today to tell the story. But it felt like a giant to me. It was just a little tiny 4-point that I got. I ended up getting lost. Miraculously, I got helped where I was found in the wilderness and they directed me out of there. So that was my first intro to mule deer hunting, and being lost and all that didn't deter me, but that was just, for whatever reason, I fell in love with mule deer. I just couldn't get myself to burn a tag on blacktail. As much as I respect blacktail and the guys that hunt those, because I know it's super difficult, something about the terrain where mule deer are that I absolutely love versus the jungle of blacktail.
Cool, man. Cool. Remi?
Yeah, I'm Remi, and I've been... Sorry, everyone gave me like this weird look. They're like, wait, are you really Remi?
I was checking this out. I couldn't hear you there for a sec, so
gotcha.
Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, so I do a lot of different stuff. I write for some magazines, Western Hunter Magazine, do the Solo Hunter TV show. You find that on Amazon now, and a lot of people see it on YouTube. People see stuff different places, so YouTube, wherever. Do a little podcast, Cutting the Distance podcast. And yeah, I grew up in Nevada, and Nevada, your only option is mule deer. And so when I grew up hunting, I mean, I love it. But one thing that I'm really passionate about is early season mule deer hunting. And I think it's partially, kind of like Ryan was saying, is mostly because of the terrain. And early season, you get to hunt them in the alpine, you get to hunt them. It's such a cool hunt that if someone's like, yeah, you can only hunt one hunt for the rest of your life, that would be on the top of that list. Now, it would be a very hard thing to decide between a few different things, but archery season, early season Nevada mule deer or high country mule deer anywhere, that's got to be right up there at number one.
I mean, that's saying a lot because, I mean, you've been around North America extensively, around the world pretty much, to my knowledge. And to, like you said, I mean, for heaven's sake, like you said, people ask you to narrow the scope, and it's a pretty impossible task. But so I think that's definitely saying something for both you guys to be like, to be able to narrow it down to kind of that finite of a point and be like, no, these things are that awesome. Like if I was going to pick it, that's it.
I like hearing Remi say that because that's like affirmation. Because I try to convince people about like the beauty of mule deer hunting all the time. There's always this silly little argument: is it elk or what's the best thing to hunt? And there is no answer to that. But there is just something about mule deer. And I'm with Remi on the fact that early season, they're not hard-horned yet. You get to see a lot of animals. You get to see them summer range, tops of the hill generally, and some of the coolest country alpine type stuff. Something about that specific time of year, chasing muley bucks is just incredible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit. I mean, where are you finding these deer? Sounds like it's, you're up high. Like you said, it's early in the year. Like how early are we talking? I mean, it probably depends on the state, maybe when they're going to have their archery opener, but like what's kind of the timeline there,
Yeah, it does. It definitely varies on the state. I know Remi being from Nevada, you guys start really early.
August. It could be August through September. I mean, mostly I would say August is the beginning of it, and then I would say mid-September would be kind of the end of it, if we're talking early season. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I found. Being from Washington, it used to be September 1st, so I would have to kind of like do my job pretty quickly because they go hard-horn pretty fast. Generally, by the end of that first week in September in Washington anyway, a lot of those bucks have scraped, and they're starting to drop down into that secondary living area. But the beauty about states like Nevada or Utah, where it's a mid-August, early August opener, August 10th, August 15th, man, you feel like you have some time to really learn them, see them in that environment. There's not this rush to try to get them out in the open with your bow, with a threat of them becoming hardhorn and dumping down into, maybe generally I've found that they dump down about 1,000 feet once they've scraped that velvet off. So yeah, generally I think Remi's right. It's like mid-August to mid-September. That's kind of the time frame there.
Gotcha. And so when you guys are talking about, learning these deer, right? So you're getting up there. I'd assume, glassing is a pretty strong component of finding the deer. And then along with that, though, you're talking about learning the deer. So you're spending some time, not just like finding a buck and going after it because you found it. Are you kind of taking time to learn maybe a specific deer or just kind of a group of deer, or how's that work in general? Like I know every situation is probably going to be a little bit different. Every deer is going to be different, the way different basin or, contributing factors like other people. But I mean, how's that going for you?
Yeah, I think it really varies. Again, if you're hunting your home state and you have the ability to scout those weeks leading up to the opener, that changes everything. Maybe you have the ability to go find a specific buck and look for an age class and pick one out or two or three and then really target that buck and learn his behaviors and figure out that whole program. I think I travel a lot now. I try to pull tags in these early states, Nevada, for example. And so I don't have the ability to go out and scout places like that. So really you're just kind of, you're breaking everything down into finding these alpine basins and it's not always alpine basins, high deserts, it's a ton of high desert down there. And, just looking for, you tend to find bachelor groups of bucks at that time of year. And, if you're going for a certain age class, then, yeah, you try to find that one. But, yeah, I think each type of topography is a little bit different. Nevada is significantly different than Washington was. Back home in Washington, it was smaller areas. You don't really get above timberline. You're looking for offshoots, terrain up in the tamarack type country where you're finding small openings in places, and a lot less densely populated with deer. Versus Nevada, from what I've seen so far, you've hunted a lot more than me, Remi, but it just feels like there's a lot more deer to pick and choose from. And having to leave, a certain group of deer because maybe there's some folks around is not a big worry. It's like you can go find more.
Yeah. I mean, I try to hunt as many places as I can, and you'll see like different areas you hunt differently. So if I'm in Montana for that early archery season, their season sometimes starts later. It depends on the year, but maybe that's the beginning of September. And depending on when the deer shed the year before and the type of winter there was is going to depend on when they're going to shed their velvet the following year. But I'll look, like you say, like higher. What I like to do is I like to find areas with low deer densities, but a higher percentage of just not going to be running into someone bumping the deer. Because early season deer, mule deer, aren't necessarily patternable, but they are predictable. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like whitetail hunters, I think the thing about whitetails or whatever early season, they're super patternable. They'll move the same trails to the feed and whatever. Mule deer might be predictable. Like they're gonna feed in this one area. So if I'm scouting and I find him, I know, okay, this buck lives here. Unless he's pressured, he's probably going to be there. But the way that he comes in, you might watch him 2 days in a row go on one trail and you think, oh, I'll go sit over there. You could sit there the rest of the season. He's not going to go that same way or within bow range. Absolutely. So it's like he's predictable but not patternable.
Okay.
And that's one thing that I think is so challenging about early season. If I were to pick something if you asked me what's the hardest animal to hunt, I would say early season mature mule deer.
Absolutely.
Because it's just a mind game, or even just, I would say, big mature mule deer. Once it hits the rut, it's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But early season, they're looking out for danger. They're in bachelor groups, often with lots of eyes. And really the most the most consistent way to kill them is spot and stalk. Whereas everything else, they kind of have a weakness. Those deer, they don't necessarily have a weakness. And as soon as you think you figured them out, you kind of tricked yourself. There are times where you notice something and you go, okay, they're doing this, I'm going to go do that, and it works out.
Right.
But I'd say for the majority of the time, you really have to kind of understand what they're doing and then make your plan accordingly. One thing that I've done over the years is when I first started hunting archery early, whatever, I would go out in July. I would scout, figure out these deer, go, okay. And then I would watch the deer every day of the season. Like there was a buck that I hunted one year for over 100 days. Like just trying to figure out and I learned a lot about deer then. Mm-hmm. So they're predictable, but then they've got their ways that the things that they do that they mess up at. And that's like, once you find what those deer are doing where they're messing up, that's their Achilles heel. But I feel like the best strategy for hunting early season mule deer, and maybe you agree, or everybody hunts stuff different, but I was like, I look for that one deer that did something stupid, because you'll kill that deer. Like it's the easiest thing when you find one that does something dumb. Yeah, that's when you go.
You're the guy. You're
because
the guy.
There's those one deer that always bed looking over something, wind at their back, whatever. And then there's that one deer. The one day he's like, yeah, this shady spot behind the rock, the wind's going the other way, but I'm going to sit here for a little bit. Right. And then you go and kill that deer.
That's what I was going to ask. Is like, when you're talking about it in that way, like, is it because they're doing something that makes them vulnerable? And then you're like, I'm going to go exploit that.
Yes.
Now, is that an individual scenario? Like that deer kind of, you see him do that one time and then you make your move? Or is that almost even, you're like, no, that deer like kind of has a habit of doing this one thing and I'm going to exploit that?
I think a lot of time it's just, they did it, and you got to do it when they do it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like some deer, it depends on hunting pressure and where they are as well. Some deer just don't like to make mistakes, and it's those big mature mule deer that make mistakes less often. So if I don't have a lot of time to hunt, I mostly just find dumb deer and stalk it. But I just stalk deer that are making mistakes.
Okay. Right.
Because. Yeah, and I've hunted a lot of different ways. That way seems to be the most consistent. Then there's the other approach where it's just like see deer, stalk deer. And a lot of guys do that. But I think once you start messing with a deer, especially early, like you have the advantage because they haven't been really hunted hard yet early. So once they know that you're there, every time you mess up, that's just one less chance you're going to get. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Absolutely, yeah. Unmolested deer are the best deer to put stalks on, right?
Yeah. If you've got a deer that like made a mistake and he hasn't been stalked yet, odds are really good that if you don't mess that up, like if you don't do something stupid yourself, you'll probably get in and get a shot. So it's like I look for what I call like high percentage stalks, where the deer where I have a slight advantage, because that's the hardest part, is just finding a deer that gives you the slight advantage. Because most of the time, not that they aren't stalkable, but they have the advantage. So I look for anything that tips the scale in my favor just a little bit. Bedding in a place where they've got an unobstructed view, putting themselves where the wind is in my favor, or maybe I watch it for a couple of days and like, this is what the deer are doing. They're hitting this and they've got nowhere else to bed but that patch. Okay, I'll ambush there, or kind of making a plan based on their weakness.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I feel like the topography kind of dictates everything, right? I can remember experiences where there's places, I've hunted mountains in Nevada where there are beds everywhere. And so patterning them is really difficult. Like Remi said, it's like they've got so many different places that they can dump into and bed, and they're not doing the same bed day in and day out. I've also hunted places where you can count that there's a couple spots, there's a couple shady spots when the sun hits here where a big buck has this little pattern. It's not as common for sure, but picking the terrain that you're hunting sometimes really matters. One of the things that I like to do, and the only reason I have the ability to do this is because I have time. I try to give myself 10 days on a hunt. Coming from out of state, I want to have the ability to, if I do find that one buck that's just really, that excites me, maybe I'll just stop right there and I'm going to wait, like Remi said, for him to make a mistake. He's put himself in a spot. Maybe the first day I show up, it's like, wow, that's the dumb one. He put himself right behind that rock, and that's a really stalkable spot. But I'm really careful when it comes to not pushing him, not being reckless in an area that doesn't have any folks. I feel like I've always set myself up with time so I can sit back and watch. And I can remember an experience a couple of years ago on a Colorado early season hunt where I found a handful of bucks. One of them was super sexy. I mean, this was like a dream buck of mine, right? Just long tines and just a really cool looking buck, and had the age and sway back and all that. And but he was in a spot where there was no way I was going to get this buck. I mean, I would have needed ropes and climbing gear to just come down this big chute, and it wasn't going to happen. But there were areas in that basin where if he moved over and he fed over in this little chute one day and he bedded over here, I could have made a play on him. So I ended up just kind of, I still hunted around and looked at other bucks, but I kept coming back to that one, just waiting for him to make a mistake, put himself in a vulnerable spot. It took a long time. It was day 8 when he finally moved away from this ledge where he'd been bedding with the other bucks. And he put himself in just almost a gimme of a spot. And I got in on that buck, and I ended up taking that buck. But if I wouldn't have had the days to do it, it would have never happened. And it was like the 8th day before he made a mistake.
Wow.
So,
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it sounds like there's, the bucks are highly visible, right? You're talking about essentially relocating a deer multiple times. And I know that's one thing that I struggle with personally. And part of that comes down to time, right? And I guess I'm not talking necessarily high country mule deer, but maybe hunting in general. But like, I'm always like, I don't know if I'm going to find that deer again. And maybe that's like a confidence thing or a time thing. But I'm always like, man, I think I predominantly have like this make hay while the sun is shining, even though maybe the sun might not be shining as brightly as it could be tomorrow. You end up blowing the deer out versus, killing him the next day or something like that. But it sounds like, you're talking about being patient and just waiting for the time is right to have that high percentage scenario where you have, a much higher likelihood of success.
Yeah, and I could definitely go both ways. I think if you're in a highly pressured area where you pretty much count on other people to be coming in and possibly picking up that same deer, I'd definitely get a little more reckless and impatient and try to push the envelope a little bit more. But boy, if you get that feeling like I'm the only guy and I've got days to do this, there's nobody else up here. I haven't seen a boot track. There was nobody in the parking lot, or you're just so far back that there's just not going to be some folks. I'm going to be the most cautious person on the planet and make sure that I don't mess it up. But I think just knowing the country, knowing how many guys are around, that kind of dictates a lot of that.
Yeah, knowing how much time you have. I mean, there's so many. That's one way of hunting them, and then like you say, there's the other way of. That's the way that I would hunt one particular deer. You're kind of talking about if you're hunting one particular deer and there's no one around, whatever. That's how I'm going to hunt it. But if you're just like, hey, you got 3 days to hunt and you want to kill a nice buck, then what I do is I hunt places where deer are going to put themselves in more likely opportunities for me to stalk. Like I'm going to areas where there's not as many trees and I've got a nice south-facing slope with some rim rocks. Like that's awesome because even if the wind's bad, sometimes it'll blow right over the top of them. You sneak down from the top, they're right below you. It's a done deal. Or you say, you figure them out for a day, do a lot of glassing, see what they like to do, and then you spend the rest of your time kind of running and gunning between spots where deer are going to do something that you're going to give you an advantage. And every time, as soon as you see that advantage, it's like, you need to be there now, go make it happen. There's been deer hunts where I'm literally from sun up to sundown running from spot to spot. Like you're like, deer there, run, get there. Okay, now he's no longer behind the rim rock, but now they're going to the trees. Run to the trees, crawl through and then like get there, slow down, crawl in, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So it really depends on the hunt.
Yeah.
If you're targeting one deer and there's nobody around and you've got the time, then you wait for the deer to make a mistake. But there's the other times where you're really just going, the more times I have an opportunity at something, the more likely I am to succeed or learn something and do it different next time.
Yeah, like certain hunts are definitely opportunity hunts. Like you say, if you have 3 days and it's just like you want to fill that deer tag, oh man, running and gunning and taking every opportunity, even if it's a 50% chance of you'll get in there tight, take it for sure. Yeah, I think every spot is definitely different, and it's really hard to just like pin it down to one thing, one strategy.
Yeah. And I could see, even just, thinking it through as we talk about it. Number one, I'm not super picky when it comes to deer. In fact, I was watching, I think, one of your videos I think it was an Instagram story, actually, Ryan, and you're like, here's some bucks, and they're little guys. And in my head, I was actually kind of scratching my head because like, little guys, man, like I'd be putting a move on those things right now. But, but also, I guess with that, right, like I said, I haven't personally hunted high country mule deer. Probably the thing that I've done closest to that would be like alpine blacktails on Prince of Wales. Like it was very alpine-y, like rocky rim rock and things like that. And so I'm, drawing, I guess, some mental parallels to like what you guys are describing, what I've seen and read about. But also, I suppose if I was like waiting all week, if I hadn't done it a ton, right? If I was waiting all week to like make the perfect stalk, like imagine if you're going to make multiple stalks, like obviously you're going to do it more. You're going to, you're going to have more opportunities to be successful. But I bet you're going to learn a heck of a lot along the way with each one of those stalks. At least that'd be my speculation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I haven't done the blacktail thing, but it does sound very, very similar because they're kind of above all the scrub. It feels like tree line, right? Mm-hmm. Up in the open alpine and all that. And I haven't done it. I'm sure Remi's probably
it's very similar. I mean, the tactics are the same, just above timberline, the deer visible, they're easy to spot, and then you just kind of and on the blacktails too, sometimes you get a lot of opportunities.
Right.
If you aren't picky. Yeah. You can have a day where you're like, well, I should kill a deer today. And some of that too, you just kind of mob around up at the top because it's a little thicker. And you just start seeing deer as you're going on some of those little benches. And that's a great way to hunt mule deer as well, like getting into their zone and getting the wind right and still hunting too. I've taken a lot of mule deer still hunting, but if I was to choose one tactic for early season mule deer, it's the spot and stalk game and a combination of spot and stalk. And I don't know how much you do this, Ryan, but spot and stalk and ambush. It's more of like you're stalking, but the deer they're moving from their beds to their feeding areas, and you kind of have a general idea. This is where they're going to feed, maybe a big sage flat or something like that, or a avalanche chute, but they're bedding at this area. There's no good way to get them when they're bedding. That's ideal if you can get them when they're bedded, but sometimes there's too many deer, too bad winds. So it's like this combination of moving and setting yourself up where I'm going to cut them off.
Okay.
I do a lot of that. And I think that people don't maybe even talk about that as much with mule deer because they say about spot and stalk, but it's spotting, stalking to a spot where you can ambush. Like they're going 25%, you're going 75, or they're going 50, you're going 50, somewhere, and you do a few of those. That I've had a lot of success on some bucks with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you're right. I don't think it gets talked about a lot. I feel like a lot of people think of spot and stalk and they think of the classic situation. You got a nice boulder or a rim rock. You got a buck bedded underneath it in a shady spot. You got this nice area above it to come down. The wind's coming up, and you come down, you shoot that thing in this bed.
Yeah.
I don't know. It happens, and sometimes you find, it happens, in quite a few hunts. But I feel like lately, a lot of the times, it is, like you said, you go 75%, and then you let them do the rest. Because a lot of times you don't have an opportunity to get within 25, 35, 40 yards, but you can get within 75 yards or 100 yards, and taking a gamble and guesstimating which way, or maybe you've seen which way they tend to feed out of this bed. Man, I've had a lot of opportunities where it is about just getting tight, and then it's just being completely patient and having the confidence that when he gets up, yeah, he may feed the other way, but there's a real good chance he's going to feed either right or left where you're going to have a shot. And man, I can think of so many times where that's the case. It's just putting yourself in a place and then having the mental fortitude to just stay there. And that may be for 3, 4, 5 hours until he makes a move. And then you're able to get him when his guard is down and he's just up and feeding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I always joke with my friends, or even when I'm out there, I'm like, okay, on TV, when I watch people kill early season mule deer, it's always like that bedded in behind the rock with the wind. And I was like, I rarely ever see that scenario. Like, it just doesn't happen. I was like, man,
it's magical when it does.
I was like, because that's just a deer doing something stupid. Of course you're going to kill that deer. It just did something stupid. But I always find deer that hardly do something stupid. So what I have to do is adjust my tactics and the way that I stalk them. If I can stalk a deer when it's bedded, that's great. But the downside to that is that's when the deer, for the most part, is the most alert. And there's also deer that you don't see that they're just as alert, always on guard. They only bed in places that they feel safe, and that means that they're going to be a disadvantage to you. I think that if I think back of most of the deer that I've killed early season with a bow, like especially like the bigger bucks, it's like Ryan said, it's like I will get into an area and wait, like they're bedded, then I wait for them to move feeding. And I would say probably 70% of the early season mule deer I kill are feeding. There's this sweet magical moment when they're feeding, and it's like at first they're super on it. They're looking around.
Right when they stand up.
Yeah, and then you let them, like, I do a lot of stalks when they're feeding, because that's when there's this one point where you can kind of get in there within that 100-yard range, and you almost just acclimatize yourself to that group of mule deer. And it's like at that point, it's like they're no longer looking your direction. Their heads are down. They just don't really care. And it's normally that last hour of you just know it when it happens. Like, you're there long enough where you're like, you could almost get up, do the polka, get back down, and you're like, because they're there and you didn't rush it. You just waited for that opportune time when their heads are down, mostly they're feeding and they're distracted, as opposed to a bedded deer that's ears are out, every other deer's looking. He might nod off but he's probably got 4 other buddies that are on alert.
Right.
And when those deer kind of all get together, there's movement going on, there's other things going on. You just kind of make your way in that.
Right.
And there's a lot of, if you've got a little like crawling and whatever, you can do pretty well when they're just distracted and they've looked out for danger long enough. And, a lot of time you can kind of predict where they're going and get into that position where they're like, all right, they've been there long enough, and then they get into this weird distraction mode of now they're feeding.
Gotcha.
And that's the best time. I think that's a great time to sneak up on them as well. So it's like either when they're bedded solid, doing something stupid, or distracted.
Yeah, I can think back when, I don't know, I guess I was a rookie back in the early days. I made so many mistakes where you kind of wait for a buck to get up, and then the second he gets up, you're like, I got to draw my bow and try to get this shot. But you're right. Like you said, that's when they stand up, and if you observe them and have spent some time with them, they tend to stand up, and they're high alert, and they're looking around for danger. But then there's this point, and it usually doesn't take very long, where they just completely relax. And then, do the poke or whatever, get your bow drawn back.
Yeah.
And generally that just gives you so much of a better chance of them not detecting movement, but letting their head get down and start feeding again. So for sure, no, I screwed up on that a lot, and I'm assuming, new bow hunters probably make that same mistake, and they don't allow that deer to just get completely relaxed. Because generally they're high alert when they're bedded. They're very high alert when they first stand up.
Okay, gotcha. Well, and I could see like a lot of advantage, at least in my bow hunting experience, like closing those last critical yards, particularly in country that's, noisy, or there's rocks you might roll, like I did in Arizona, and blew out a really nice coos deer buck. But it makes a lot of sense, like being able to watch that deer, let them stand up, let them relax, particularly if they're not in a really good stalkable spot to begin with, and let them potentially, I guess, kind of pick a vector or that direction and let them close the distance. Now, like you said, they're moving, they're distracted a little bit, they're relaxed, they're making some noise, right? So they're not, they're quiet, but they're not completely quiet, and if they can close those last critical few yards for you, hopefully all you have to do is draw your bow and make a good shot, which is easier said than done too. But
yeah, no, there's just a lot of opportunities where you're going to screw up that last 50 yards if you try to push it, and it just makes more sense, and your odds are going to go way up to not blow that deer out if you just sit back and wait and let them make the move. I've gotten way better at that over the years of just not going all the way, going so far, realizing this is as close as I can get. And, knowing what you can get away with is something that just comes over time, I feel like.
Another thing that I think a lot of people don't think about is the biggest enemy for early season mule deer, for the hunter, is the wind.
Right.
And so what I do is there's times where you're like, all right, you have to pay attention to thermals, your wind, because the winds are so swirly in these mountains. There's so many times you sneak into a buck and you go like, all right, you're sitting on him waiting for him to get up, and like, all right, in 20 minutes the wind's gonna swirl. And you might have been there for 5 hours and that deer didn't get up, and you're like, okay, well now we're gonna get in trouble. And you sat there all day, and then you're like, dang it, I should have done something different. You don't know. But one thing that I try to pay attention to is I'll see a deer bed, and I think a lot of people, right when they bed in the morning, you see it bed, and you're like, oh, go get after it. But the winds are not stable. I like to wait until they bed later on in the day and get those like hot day, get those thermals going, and know that, okay, I've got a 4-hour window before anything's going to change. Or I'll go in the you kind of plan based on what the thermals are going to do, what the winds have been doing, and then where that deer is on the mountain and how the winds are affected by the contours of the mountain. And that factors in a lot to when I decide to stalk, what I decide to stalk, and whether I'm going to do an ambush setup or something else, because you'll notice, every day they've been hitting the sage flat. They're bedding up in those trees. The wind's always going up to them, but in the evening, then it starts to drop. So you'll do your stalk, you'll get in there, and then that shade hits, they stand up, and the wind's right to them, and you just blew it. Where you should have been below them most of the day.
Which is probably the exact reason why they stay bedded that long and are comfortable standing up, because they know that the wind is going to push any threat from above down, and they're probably looking downhill. And you know what? It's really unfair. They're always using their senses to their advantage.
They are.
How dare they?
I don't get it.
Yeah, it is interesting.
It's like they're trying to survive or something.
Yeah. The first bed that they take. Now, I've seen deer, like, first bed is their all-day bed. You know? It's rare. Generally, they bed in a spot, and, within an hour, the sun's kind of tipped over, and, put a little light on them, and they get up and move, sometimes longer than that, and they'll go to a second or sometimes a third bed. And Remi's totally right. That's probably going to be the all-day bed, that bed where that sun isn't going to move to the point where it's going to get on them, it's going to heat them up, full shade. That's the spot. That's the time when you want to think about making that play for sure.
Yeah. when I'm stalking in, like if I'm stalking a deer in an all day bed, what I do is I anticipate where the sun's going to move, and then I get in there while it's bedded, but I don't get into where I can get a shot most of the time. I go and anticipate, because they are going to, like that, they're going to get hot, and most of the time they'll get up and then they'll walk back into the shade of that same area. So I anticipate that, because there's so many times that when I started out, I'd stalk into that bedded deer, have no shot because he's laying down, there's a juniper behind him, whatever. And then he gets up and he walks the wrong direction, and then something gets messed up. You're whatever. So I try to anticipate, okay, when that deer gets up, how am I going to get a shot?
Okay.
So I get into where I'm going to get a shot when he gets up the next time.
Gotcha.
It's a lot of like, you want to be 2 steps ahead, not 1 step behind.
Right. So I'm trying to picture that. So like you're saying, like, let's say he's bedded, like, I guess, like probably in the shade to some degree, and he's going to kind of follow that shade a little bit. Is that what you're describing, or am I missing?
Yeah, so a lot of what they'll do is, as the sun moves, the shadow's going to get off that deer, and he's going to be baking in the sun. And he'll sit there for, 10 minutes or whatever, and then he'll get up, he'll like stretch out a little bit, he'll probably do like a little 360, he'll look around, and then he'll just move whatever and sit back down facing the other direction.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's just anticipating where that shade's going to move. If I think it's going to take me an hour to get over there, and you're stalking in from this way because he's bedded right here, you're better off stalking around the other side where you're going to anticipate him getting into, if it's going to take some time, and you're like, how deep shaded is he? What's his whole scenario look like? What are some factors that are going to come up on the time it takes me to get into position?
Gotcha.
I like to try to think of all that stuff. And sometimes you think of it, when you do it enough, you just think of it simultaneously and you just go do it.
Right.
You're like, yeah, you just run over there and shot a deer. And I'm like, yeah, but all this other knowledge was just like running through my head at the same time. And I think it pisses people off that hunt with me. They're like, this isn't right. Like, I've been hunting out here all week, and like, you just come up here and go kill a deer. And I'm like, yeah, but I've put in thousands of days doing this. Like, I see a deer and I know what to do.
Yeah.
But these are just some of the things that I think I almost do subconsciously.
Right.
At this point, where I used to really analyze it. Now it's just like, I see it, I analyze it, I go. You've done it enough.
No, I can see that, because like, from the outside, right? Like if I was watching that, I'd be like, how did Remi know that when he got up, he was going to walk that way? Like he could have gone anywhere, right? But in reality, like, no, he was going to do that because he still wants to be in the shade. And if you think about the way the sun's going, how those shadows are going to lay, or maybe, how that terrain feature, or how tall it is, what the shadow, it's going to continue to cast as the day moves on. That's interesting. Yeah. Like you said,
I've even got on bucks where you're like, all right, he bedded at the one tree out by itself, and you look at it and go, nah, he's going to get there. That's not going to provide enough shade. And you just go and sit in the largest clump of trees next to that, and he'll get up in 2 hours and he'll walk straight to you.
I've played that game too in Nevada, but I've seen that where there's places down there where the mountains are just it's sagebrush, it's high desert, very, very few trees. And there's so few areas where they're going to find any shade in that heat that it's almost super predictable. There's like a couple spots. And you're totally right. Yeah, it's like, well, if they're here, they're not going to stay there all day. They're going to get smoked out here pretty quick. They're definitely going to go to here.
Yep.
And that's a lot of fun. One of the things that I always try to take advantage of is a good directional wind. Typically, if you're blessed with a day or two, whatever, throughout that hunt, man, you can get not reckless, but you can just take so many more chances with that wind. And, like I said, and that's worked on coos days. I feel like we're not talking about coos, but coos is one of those deer where if I get a day where there's like a real good directional, man, that allows you to get so much tighter on an animal that's just super jumpy. I mean, you got to remember on these mule deer, they're getting hunted 365. Any little noise, they're used to trying to get away and living their life around cougars and cats and anything else that's trying to grab them. So any little noise whatsoever usually just either ends it, puts them on super high alert, and you're hosed. But, man, a good directional, anything like that is always super helpful. And you can get, like I say, not reckless, but definitely take a lot more chances.
Yeah, it seems like, that would definitely take your, you think like, oh, wind, their nose, but that's also going to give you some noise cover as well.
For sure.
Interesting. So what types of, when you're looking at, maybe a unit or maybe an area that you maybe haven't been to before? Like, what are you trying to identify that says like, oh, when I get here, I'm going to hike from point A, but, you know, points A, B, and C, like those are my top 3 places I want to check out. Like what types of things are you looking for? And maybe that could be like even when you get there too and you see, you know, what's around. But
yeah, I think new country, you know, picking apart areas where you have a good vantage, where you can see a lot of country. Hopefully, you know, I like to spend some time with my mapping ahead of time. There's so many options now with Google Earth and all those different things where you can get a good feel for where you get a good glassing vantage, and you can just see a lot without having to go in there and kind of interrupt everything. Always finding that perfect vantage where you can see a lot. I mean, that's kind of number one when I go to a new area. I just don't want to get in there very much. I want to keep it unmolested. I don't know. And one of the things, like this is easy and this is something I'm sure everybody thinks about, but looking into areas where deer are bedded throughout the day, obviously they're going to be bedded in the shade, getting that vantage where you have the ability to look into the shade. If you're looking in the wrong direction, man, you're probably going to miss some stuff. If you're looking where, you know, the sun is up and you're looking and you can't quite see the backside of the rocks or the backside of the trees, you're not going to see a whole lot that day if you weren't there in the morning to see them get there.
Yeah, I mean, what I find a lot of deer midday. Like, what I do is I look for where the wind's blowing downhill and the shade's below. Like, you're looking you almost like look into the sun with the wind, look into the sun and wind simultaneously, and you'll always find deer. And that's how you find the biggest bucks in the middle of the day, because what happens is the smart bucks, the mature deer, now small deer kind of do dumb stuff. Like, that's just how it is. But mature deer, they always bed with the wind at their back, looking downhill, and not have to move very much during the day. And they're secure there, and they're safe there. But once you know where they live, then you like work backwards from there. Where are they feeding? Where are they watering? You know why they're there. That's not the hard part. Now the hard part is figuring out where are they going to make a mistake. And sometimes when they do that, you know, sneaking up from below a deer is very, very difficult. But it's not impossible, especially if you do something where you can sneak in and then get into a position where you might be between them and something else. But the thing I do is the first place I look is where the wind's coming downhill and I'm looking toward the sun, because then I can look into the shadows.
Gotcha.
And that's generally, like, anywhere I go, I look for those kind of orientations based on prevailing winds and whatever. But I also look for like head basins a lot of times early season, like what it is, you know, it's kind of like looks like an alien head on the map. Because what happens is they have multiple options to bed depending on the wind. And that's why those areas are good, because they can have everything in one basin, but they're going to also find security no matter what the wind's doing that day. Okay. And then you get the deer that are in those basins, and then it goes the exact opposite direction, but they can pop over onto the other side. So I look for areas where it's like they've got everything they need, and they've got that place where they can bed and not be killed.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's such a... Like, it sounds simple, but it makes so much sense. Like, you know, you're looking to where you're going to be able to see the deer, because that's where the deer wants to be, because they've got everything to their advantage. But you can also see them.
Well, like, I create a checklist almost. I mean, now it's just in your head, but create a checklist of things you're looking at in the map, and you're looking for that vantage point, like where you can see all this, where you can see multiple different options and from one place, and depending on the time of day, you can look different places. And most of the time I can just pick up like new areas. I rarely go to a spot that I haven't identified on map and find deer. And there's a lot of places that don't have deer, but you start to know what to look for. And then when I find deer in an area, I really, like, if I just am out scouting and like deer here, man, I look at it on the map under just topo lines and say, what does this area have? And then I find other places that look just like that. And you just start finding deer. It's like those deer in that area like that. And it has a lot to do with the wind, where the sun's at, where the food and water sources, and how they're going to stay safe.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's like reverse map scouting.
Correct.
In a way.
Yeah, find the deer and then figure out, like, what do they like about this, and then go find other places like that.
Yeah,
and that works with so many types of hunts. Like elk is the same way, bears the same way. Try to replicate what you saw.
No, that's definitely cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge lies there. It's like, okay, so what next? You know, like, I even experienced some of that. I mean, I know we're talking mule deer, but like even like seeing deer bedded in shadows, you know, and I guess I'm relating to this like most recent Coos deer hunt that I was on. But, you know, then the challenge is like, sweet, we found one. and then now what, so what types of things are you guys doing are you doing anything special to get close, or just kind of the usual suspects, keep the wind in your favor, keep objects between you and the deer? We talked about that previously, Remi, things like that, or
being quiet. I take my shoes off a lot. Some people don't. I do. I'd rather just be silent and really pay attention to all the little stuff. That's the stuff that gets you, the stupid stuff of you're in range and then your release hits your bow riser and they're gone. Or just like or like you say, you're there and you misplace a foot and you roll a rock. I had a buddy that was on a giant buck this year, like world-class buck, and he's sitting there for hours and he just kind of tinkers around and rolls a rock right to him, and that's it. That was
gosh.
it. And he's just waiting for him to stand. So that's it. Just like paying attention and realizing mule deer, their ears are big. Their number one defense is unlike a lot of other deer, they use their ears. Like elk, doesn't matter. You can just crunch, crash, whatever. You're probably going to sneak
TV noisy, right?
Yeah. And then, but on a mule deer, you don't get that option. No. And even just paying attention to like, they bed in places where they know they can hear what's coming up behind them. Balsam root, like that dries out, like looks like mule's ear or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, in the alpine,
dry,
dude, just like you got to pay attention to that kind of stuff because they're going to use their ears as much as their nose in a lot of ways.
Gotcha. And that's a good thing to identify, right? That's a situation where you get close to that stuff and you go, yeah, this is as close as I'm going to get. Like maybe you got to either move, I guess, or get in that spot where you think they're going to likely move that direction and you can ambush them.
Yeah, I think Remi's right. I think paying attention to, like, I'm super anal about every single thing on that final approach. I do the same thing, take off my shoes. I wear kind of like a moccasin style. Sometimes I'll put those on. Sometimes that's not quite quiet enough. If it's rocky, I'll put a sock on over the thin leather mock, and that helps. Tucking the pant legs in. Hopefully you've got pants that aren't swishy. Everything down to the bino harness that you're using. I'm surprised at a lot of folks come out and some of the gear they have is just, you're never going to pull that bino harness out of there without making a noise where he's not going to hear it.
Yeah.
And then also, like you say, on the release, I shoot a thumb release and, you practice with it, try to be as quiet as possible, down to finding one that doesn't have a loud click to it. I wrap my my quiver with bunny fur because, I know sometimes when you're getting in tight, you want your release. I mean, you just want to be ready, like perfectly ready. And just one little tick of that release hitting your quiver, and the jig is up at that point, right? So I wrap everything, try to make sure everything is just completely quiet and silent. And a lot of times now I don't even have a bino harness on at all. I just go with the straps because if I want to use it, just that cordura, a lot of harnesses are made of a cordura.
Sure.
Just pulling your binos out or slipping them back in is just too loud when it's dead quiet.
Yeah.
And you're inside of 50 or whatever, or 100 even. Just really paying attention to the gear, and every single footstep matters. I think it's easy also, the fitness aspect of it. It's real easy to, if you're not in shape or you haven't ever had to do a really, really slow stalk on an animal, it wipes you out, right, Remi?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just completely drains you when you're moving at a snail's pace. So being fit and maybe practicing that, I'm not going to the level of taking yoga or anything like that yet. I probably should. It'd probably help out. But, just practicing being able to move extremely slow and paying attention to every single footfall, every single move. Super important on mule deer especially. They got those big old ears, and they're getting chased by cats, and cats can be pretty quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, describe because I think, I'm hunting with a lot of people, and I feel like everybody has their own speed, so like describe extremely slow if you can.
Oh, man.
It's just like, it's slow enough to be below. I have like a thing that I think is like below perception. So it's slow enough to where it depends on the scenario. Like every situation's different because there's certain times where you need to be there while they're there, and that's running.
Okay.
And then there's the scenario where it's like, okay, you go from running to, is it dry? Like how, sometimes you'll go 100 yards in an hour. Mm-hmm. It honestly depends on,
wow. Okay.
on how you are. Like if it's loud and I've got my bow and I'm like, okay, they could see me. I have to stay low. No wind. It's going to be every movement is so slow that you don't make hardly any noise, or the noise that you do make doesn't sound like anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on the cover you're in or the ground you're on. I mean, if it's rocky and it's that dry dirt, which a lot of the Nevada type hunts have, you can't quite go slow enough, but you also have to be aware of your time restraints, right?
Mm-hmm.
When's the wind going to switch? All those type things. But yeah, sloth-like, I mean, for the most part, but getting in and just...
So you're physically growing moss then?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
But I mean, that could be when you get to 100 yards. It could be when you get to 80. Like it just depends on the scenario. And then there's times where you're like, I'll just stalk the entire way in my boots and backpack, because the scenario, it's like if they're bedded below a ledge, yeah, dude, I'm running to that point and I'm breathing heavy and I slow down 10 yards from the ledge and just creep up. And it's like, yeah, because you know that deer made a mistake and you got to get there in that amount of time. There's other times where it's bedded and you're like, yeah, I'm going to crawl all day, and you crawl in all day and you don't even get to 100 yards and that deer gets up and starts feeding. And you're like, whoop, that didn't work. Right. You know, so it just depends. It's so situational.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you talk about being in shape. Like, obviously those mountains are steep. They're big. You know, you're covering a lot of ground just to get in, and then couple that with, running somewhere with your backpack,
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and being tensed up is just, man, it drains you, physically drains you. I'm usually the most tired after a stalk that didn't work out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. The whole, you're using muscles you didn't know. You're getting beat by the sun. You're just by the end, you just feel... the dust and the whatever, and then you go sleep on the rocks somewhere. It's physically and mentally draining.
Right.
And it's just, sometimes the guys that are the most successful in that, it's not the guys that are the best at mule deer hunting, the best shots. It's just the dudes that are like a nail that can keep getting hit with a hammer and not give up. Just like, yep, those are the dudes. They go out, they just keep grinding, and they're going to be the ones that are successful because they're just out there long enough that, I don't know, persistence and the deer doing something stupid intersect.
Right.
And most of my success is just attributed to the fact that I can be out there and other people go and take a nap in the middle of the day, and I'm like, yeah, full sun, lips bleeding. I don't give a I'm just a mule deer robot, mule deer hunting robot. I just hunt. That's all I do. Think of nothing else. I don't want to sleep. I just go. And then you're like, yeah, I got one.
It's true. Every opportunity matters, and you got to take advantage. I feel like elk hunting, sometimes you take naps, but never for mule deer. You're always able to pick them up, and generally they're in the open. So there's always opportunity to glass up a big buck, and it can just, similar to elk, it can just happen, when you least expect it.
Yeah. I mean, my eyes just get fried. And I think one of the best pieces of gear you can take on an early season mule deer hunt is eye drops. Because it's dusty.
Yeah.
You're in the sun all day. You're looking into the sun. You're getting fried. And just eye drops. That's because you're just you're doing a lot of glassing, and you might see one deer in a good spot in the middle of the day every 4 days, but it's worth it because it's in a spot that you're probably going to make a good stalk too.
How long are you guys spending in a spot? We were talking a little bit earlier, the deer are pretty visible, right? But are you if you get into a basin and you don't see anything within an hour or a basin or a spot or whatever, are you nope, I know there's deer here because maybe a variety of terrain and habitat features are coming together and you're nope, I just know deer want to be here. It's just a matter of time until I find one? Or is the terrain generally such that you're man, I didn't see anything. I need to go to that next spot and find out where these deer are? And maybe that just depends too.
It really does. Yeah. A lot of it is instinct. A lot of it is, do you feel like you saw everything? If you don't, maybe you want to spend another glassing session that evening or the next morning. If you truly feel like you've covered everything, you've seen every square inch, you put in your time, probably time to move on. But it really is dependent on the terrain. If it's got pockets of aspens, if it's got, alders where you're just not quite seeing. maybe you do want to add another morning or evening glassing session to it. There's definitely places where they're going to be above the timber, and there's definitely going to be places where it's going to take them coming out of the timber to see them, even in that early season.
Like where I hunted this last year, it was just more, you're looking at it and you go, well, there's a lot of country and I see about 4% of it. So when I sit there and glass, I know I'm not seeing the deer. Okay. So it's like, I will sit there because I know, okay, they have everything they need. It's just, I don't have enough terrain to see them. Now, if I'm in somewhere open, I'm like, okay, I should be able to pick the deer up, and I don't see deer, I'm moving. Gotcha. It depends on densities of the area, like all that plays into it. And a lot of times I try to find areas that don't have a lot of deer density, but it's like, okay, I know that there's not that many deer in this particular area, but I'm not seeing any other hunters. This is good habitat. Sooner or later, I'll find a deer here.
Yeah. Especially if you've seen like a couple tracks or something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm sure you're putting...
And I look for that as well. That's like one of my favorite places to kind of seek out is lower density, because lower density tends to mean less hunters, period.
But it's like I'm the type of hunter that I can go days without seeing something and know that I'm not doing something wrong.
Right.
Whereas if you're new into it or whatever, go to the places with the most deer. Find a nursery of deer and get into deer and understand, like, get those encounters. Because I can go to a place and not see deer for 4 days and they're like, well, why are you? And I was like, I know deer well enough to know where they're going to be and where they're not. And so I know when I'm in those areas, it might not necessarily mean that there's no deer. But I like hunting those areas because when the deer that I do see aren't pressured and whatever, and they're more age class, and that's just like the deer that I like to hunt. But until you get to that point, you might just want to get some action.
Yep. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense for sure. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. So, you're talking about eye drops, and it's something that I've never carried, but like now that I look back, I'm like, man, I probably wish I would have had some eye drops. Like you said, it's hot, it's dry, it's dusty. You're glassing intently for extended periods of time, and that's definitely a good tip. Are there other things, like what are some other kind of like maybe out of the box or overlooked things? Ryan, you're talking about 10 days. I mean, 10 days in the backcountry, that's a long time. I mean, what other things are you doing other than just being tough as nails and persistent and being mule deer robots, which I think, both you guys are. And I think that's a really strong necessary attribute or attributes to be able to do that. But what are some other kind of tricks that you've learned along the way that, people would benefit from?
I don't know if it's overlooked, but I think one of the things that's helped me and that I really put a big emphasis on is food, I guess. For 10 days, 12 days, if you're kind of shirking yourself on food and eating something that's really not giving you the energy, or you're just calorie deficient over 10 days, 2 weeks, you're probably going to start bonking. You're going to lose a little bit mentally. You're probably not going to have your head in the game by whatever, day 8, 9, 10, whatever. So I've really put a strong emphasis on the food that I carry in, making sure I have obviously enough of it, but also the nutrition is there. Really kind of tailored my food that I take to things that I can make at home, things that I typically eat at home. I know, they sit well with me. I make a lot of like high fat type cookies, a lot of coconut type concoctions, and then the meals, like the morning meal, nutrient rich, a little more carbs. I definitely add a little more carbs to the mountain food, but my meals, like the end of the day type things, I look forward to those. So making your own, very calorie dense, something that you've really enjoyed, like stuff that you eat back home, whether that's like pasta meals or rice curry dishes. I love gardening, so I like to add a lot of the gardens type stuff and the meat from prior hunts to these dishes, and then dehydrating them down.
Okay.
And having that at the end of the day. So, I think looking forward to that night's meal, and then making sure you're having food that's actually doing you right and getting you to the end of the days and still feeling good. You just kind of have to. It really is like if you're calorie deficient for so long, you just lose it. like mentally, you just kind of want to get pulled off the mountain.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest focuses that I talk about it a lot, and that's dialing in your food and the nutrition. I think the second thing would be sleep system that works for you. If you're a guy that has trouble sleeping on the mountain, I'm not that guy. I tend to sleep really good on the mountain, but maybe finding something that's going to help you sleep, whether that's a melatonin or whatever. If I take melatonin, I'm out in 10 minutes and I sleep all night long. Some people, it doesn't work that well. But I know I've talked to so many people that have a hard time sleeping in the mountains. I'm not that guy. I don't know, Remi, if you are, but finding something that's going to help you get that sleep so you're not so mentally fatigued. So, I've got my sleep system very well dialed with my bag and the pad that works well for me, whether it's hot or cold. And again, I think if you're a guy that just doesn't get the sleep, maybe try melatonin or something that really knocks you out.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I mean, you got to sleep and you got to eat, or else you're just going to be, like you said, it's just going to mentally pull you off the mountain. You're going to have to go home, probably maybe even physically, right? You're just not going to be able to operate out there. When you're, to dive into the food a little bit, when you're dehydrating, these meals yourself, how are you storing them, and then how are you cooking them on the mountain? When I generally make an off-grid dehydrated meal or a mountain house or something like that, you've got the nice package, you pour the hot water in, it's no problem. I generally burn my hand every single time, but at least it's not leaking everywhere or falling out, you seal it back up. What are you putting yours in individually then?
So there's a bunch of different ways you can go about it. I mean, you can pack an off-grid meal or a Heather's Choice or whatever food that you're comfortable with, and maybe use that bag the first night, and then for future nights, dump your homemade meal into that and use the same bag. Gotcha. Or you just get on Amazon and buy some of those Mylar bags.
Oh, okay.
Basically the same thing that Off-Grid uses or whatever, and you can put all your meals in there. One thing, I'm a little impatient in the evening, so a lot of times I'll just rehydrate my meal a little bit faster. So the jet boil that I cook with, it's got a really good toggle on it, so I can really dial that flame down. It's not like torch boil water type jet boil. I use that Minimo, so it's got just the best throttle. I mean, you can get that thing down to just a light orange flame and just simmer your food. And usually in about 5 minutes, your food is completely rehydrated and ready to go. And I do that a lot. Obviously, you got to pack a little bit of extra fuel if you're going to go that route. But it's really easy to just pick up some Mylar bags on Amazon or wherever,
okay,
and utilize that and treat it just like any mountain house meal or whatever.
Okay, cool. Remi, what keeps you on the mountain besides grit?
It's a good question. Yeah, the food's important. I don't really have trouble with food or sleep too often. I mean, some trips I really plan out my food, and other trips I'm just this jar of peanut butter will last me 4 days. No joke. I'm just the big peanut butter, that'll work. I'll just eat that for 4 days. I've done some stuff, I don't care. I don't want to think about it. I'm trying to think of stuff, anything that, mostly it just depends on where I'm at. If I bring anything that might be a little bit different, really, I think it depends if I'm going to be doing a lot of glassing. I like something to be shaded sometimes, so I'll bring either a light jacket or even just something to cover myself up in the middle of the day when I'm glassing, because most of the time it's hard to find shade and glass at the same time. Just staying out of the sun, not getting sunburnt. Just the sun beats you down because you're up high, you're at altitude. Just staying out of the sun, wearing a hooded shirt, something just a buff, just keeping the sun off you is huge.
Yeah.
Because that, the sun and the dry and the dust and the altitude, that gets most people. Yeah. It's just, it is punishing. I think that's probably the most punishing part about it. It's just it just beats you down. So I found wearing a buff, keeping long sleeves and just keeping the sun off you goes a long ways.
Yeah, man, I agree with that 100%, and I find, like you said, a buff, or oftentimes I'll wear just a lightweight merino hoodie, and I feel that does double duty too, because generally I can get it to kind of extend far enough that it kind of, blocks some of that side light that can come in and interfere with my glassing, like I'll kind of pull it forward a little bit just to shield the sun from not only myself, but also like, my eyes so I can glass, or like I said, a buff or a...
There's like throwing your jacket over and like glassing in the dark, so you can just have your binos on a tripod and just really focus in sometimes. And then I do hydration stuff is big for me. I notice like 3 o'clock, you get that 3 o'clock lull. I'll do like some kind of hydration. I use the Wilderness Athlete stuff, the Hydrate Recover. I'll even use the stuff with caffeine in the middle, like toward the end of the day, just to keep my mind there.
Okay.
To just like stay sharp, because all day of that, I don't know. I get wore down mostly by dehydration.
Okay.
Because it's August. Like, doesn't matter where you're at 10,000 feet. That sun, like, it just beats you down. You could be in Wyoming, Montana. It's mostly like high altitude. You're above timberline.
Right.
You've got like altitude going on. You've got all that stuff. So just like hydration keeps me for sure going. And then, like Ryan says, just having enough fuel, energy to do what you need to do.
Yeah. So speaking of hydration, right? And it's always a consideration that I'm thinking about, but like water, I generally drink it every day. But like when you're going into an area, like I said, it probably depends on the area. Like I guess that's always the answer. It depends. Like where am I at? Where am I going? Where do I plan on going? But like, what are you looking for when finding water? Like, is it like, I'm sure sometimes maybe it's like obvious, but like, are there like less obvious spots where you can find water that maybe wouldn't be like on a map when you're aerial scouting or something like that? Or is that just stuff you got to find along the way and hope you find it? Or
yeah, I mean, hope you find it most of the time. Like when you find, I bring something to carry a lot of water too, because sometimes you'll be, even in that high country stuff, you'll be up there, you'll follow a creek up. There's like water, water, water. And you get to the timberline, that thing's like underground somewhere. It's just popping out it popped out at 6,500 feet, and now you're at 8,000 feet. So when I find water where that's a possibility, now it just depends on the year, but like I carry it with me, I stash it. Like I'll carry that extra weight, because by the end of the day, you don't even, it's gone. You know, you just like drink it and it's gone. And then that weight's not there. But I don't know.
Same. This is where you're like, ahead of season homework comes into play, right? Hopefully, if you haven't had the ability to scout, that's real difficult. But and I've seen it where Remi was talking about. There's creek the whole way up, and then it just disappears. I've also seen it where there's no water, and then at the head of basin there's this spring that crops up.
Yep,
that's like where all the animals go to. You know. But I too, like, I don't usually risk it if I'm going in, and this is especially true with mule deer. You end up on some ridge, usually on ridges where there's just very little access to water. So I'll tend to take the weight and carry 6 liters. I've got those Hydro Packs. I just fill them up. And if you're in doubt that you're going to find water, obviously, if you can look on a map and see ahead of time that, okay, there's going to be a for sure creek, 4 miles up the basin. Okay, that's where I'm going to fill up. But man, if you're not sure, it's better to kind of take it up. Because like you said, you don't want to have to get all the way up there and then realize, all right, my suspicions were true. There's no water here. Now I got to go back down to the bottom and quit on this hunt. So yeah, you kind of have to just plan ahead and definitely pack water up if you're in doubt.
Yep. I guess if you had the time, right, or if maybe it's an in-state hunt. I mean, have you ever or thought about like pre-packing in water? Like,
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just stash it up there.
Yep. Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of my hunts back in Washington, it was never an issue. There's water everywhere.
Right.
Never had an issue with water there. But these early season hunts constantly brings me back to Nevada. So thinking about that, I just don't have the option or opportunity to get in there ahead of time and do the scouting and this and that. So if I did, I definitely would take it up, stash it. Some years, you're fortunate and you can maybe glass from the bottom, and Nevada ridges, there's usually a road on one side or the other, and you can kind of look up there and see if there are snow patches still. A lot of years you'll find, these north-facing slopes, they still have some patches, and maybe that's going to be your water source. So pack a little extra fuel, maybe do a little snow melt while you're up there, or at least expect to get those water bladders filled up with that snow and let the sun do the work and melt it for you.
Oh, okay. Cool. Cool, man.
For the most part, you can find water, but like Ryan says, mule deer have no problem dropping down 2,000, 3,000 feet and walking right back up.
Right.
Not a big deal. For a person with all your stuff, that sucks. So you're kind of like, you're like that. The deer are in an advantageous spot up on this ridge. I don't want to have to be going down and getting water every day.
Right.
And then there's so many times where you might be hunting one whatever spot, and you're like, the water's down here, and then you realize midway through the trip that there was water like 400 yards on the other side of the ridge or whatever. You know? I mean, it just happens.
That information would have been good to know.
Yeah, one of the things on Onyx, it shows little springs, but, you kind of take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. You see these little, the blue little dot on the map, and I always check those areas, but without 100% expectation that you're actually going to find water there. But if you are waterless up there, maybe check them out.
Yeah. If you, I'm switching back to stalking deer. If you blow a stalk, let's say you get in on a deer and you blow him out, and it gets the heck out of Dodge. Like, is that deer kind of over at that point, or do they sometimes come back and settle down? How far are they going? Do you just need to go try and find a different deer?
It definitely varies.
Yeah.
Sometimes not. Sometimes you'll get on that deer the very next day in the exact same spot. I've seen that. I think a lot of people assume that deer is gone forever, out of their lives forever, but it's not always the case, not by any stretch. They're, sometimes, and it depends on the topography you're in. If you have this nice little open spot on the top of a mountain and it's the only feed around, you could blow that deer out, but most likely, maybe it's not the next day. Maybe it's a few days that he'll end up back in that area, and you'll get another crack at him.
Yeah, it just depends where you're at. Like, if you're hunting more timbered stuff, like Ryan was talking about, sometimes you'll blow a deer out, and then you just never see him again because he's not going to be in a spot where you can see him.
Gotcha.
He could be 300 yards away, and you just don't see him again.
Yeah.
I mean, I had that happen this year. Saw the one big buck, he kind of was like trotting off, and then I spent 3 or 4 days looking for him, never saw him again. And then I had some friends go in there muzzleloader season, and the buck was right in there again. It's just that he was probably always there.
Right.
It's just I messed it up to a point, he just went to a place where you couldn't see him.
Right.
So it just depends. Like, yeah, and then there's those times, like you say, I mean, I've stalked a deer, blown him out, and then the next day stalked him in the exact same spot.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a Nevada hunt quite a few years ago, and it was like a first day deal where I found this great buck, and I went in on this buck, and the wind kind of busted it, had him, close to 50 yards, and I just couldn't get a shot, and then wind got me, screwed up, blew him out. Came back the next day. He wasn't there. It was like this perfect little bowl basin where there was kind of some short quakies, and man, it was like the perfect spot. Great feed in there. And, I really wanted to try to pick up that buck again. So the next handful of days, I was glassing the adjacent basin. I was glassing the basin that I messed up on, and then the next one over. And they weren't near as sexy as the one that he came from where all the feed was. And it wasn't until day 6. Day 6, that buck came right back, parked himself in the exact same spot, laid down in the exact same bed. And that was the day that I came back, picked him up, got down there, took a little bit different approach, and I got that buck.
No way.
But he ended up in the same bed just 6 days later. But he disappeared for the next, all those days, and never came in that I'd seen him in. So,
Yeah, it happens.
That's crazy. Well, I tell you what, I know I've been peppering you guys with questions. I think that's about all I have for now until in about 5 minutes when I think of 100 more questions that I'll probably want to ask you guys. But any other last minute nuggets of information you want to bestow on our listeners so they can go out and be successful high country early season mule deer bow hunters?
I don't know if there's anything that I think I've said it all. I mean, now I got to find a new place to hunt because I've given out too many secrets. Everyone's going to see me. They're going to be like, why is Remi's truck parked in all the flat, low stuff? He was talking about hunting high. I'm like, gotcha. I'm cruising water holes. You're up on the top of the mountain. I'm down in the flats. Like, because that's a whole nother, like, you could talk about that too. Like, there's deer where you find them. It's like that's high country mule deers where I find good bucks, but that's where I'm hunting. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't great hunting in some, like, I'll go to Montana or Idaho early season, and I'll do most of my hunting mid-mountain because that's where I'm like to hunt there, and that's where I'm finding the deer, and all the guys are up at the top and I'm down at the bottom thinking, you can always alter the game. I mean, I just love being up high chasing mule deer because it's the place and it's where I'm finding deer because that's where I'm hunting. So,
right.
You could take this and say, oh, everybody could go, oh, I got to go to the top. But well, if everybody's doing that, don't go there. Go somewhere else. Like, that's what I wouldn't do that,
Right.
I just like hunting up there. But there are, if you see a lot of guys parked at the trailhead and everybody's hiking up to the heads of the basin, dude, hunt the first mile of the trail. Because there's so many times where a few years ago, I had a tag in an area. I couldn't wait to go up, and I get back there, and there's just dudes everywhere and people pushing deer. I was like, what is going on? I hike back to the truck, and I'm like looking around and all the stuff like below, like low mountain. I'm like, I'm so sick of this. I just went to somewhere where there was, and I got into some of the best deer hunting I've ever had early season. And it was in the flats, in the country that's like broken, low country, timbered, whatever.
Right.
No one was down there. I had the run, and I had like one of the best deer hunts I've ever had, and got on some great bucks. So that's another thing is like, yeah, we're talking about above timberline, high country mule deer, but that's just, I have a lot of experience in there because that's where I like to hunt. Yeah. But that doesn't mean don't necessarily not look at those other places. I mean, I don't know how many times I've decided, too many people up here doing that, and you can go down somewhere else and you're like, okay, there's deer here too. Let's figure out these deer.
Yep.
That's just, something to think about, because if you listen to this and you're like, they said I got to go to this and do that. That's, until I see you up there, and then I'm going to go do something else, and still do okay. Because, they're where you find them, because where you're spending your time in hunting, that's where you're gonna have the most success, really.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think, and sometimes when you think about, or I know when I think about, early season mule deer, just like you were talking about, like you have that picture of that perfect stalk where the deer is bedded, in the shade below that rock cliff. There's a perfect approach. Like you step over the, top and you shoot him in his bed. Like when I picture early season mule deer, it's that high country, alpine, just, these big giant basins, and you're glassing, just red coated mule deer. And like you said, but deer are definitely where you find them. So thinking outside the box a little bit, isn't going to hurt, particularly if there's a lot of pressure. So.
Yeah, every place is just so different. I mean, you go back to Washington, and sometimes there's just not that much. It is on the bottom of the mountain, the bottom end of like an av chute or something. It's not on the top, but or southern Idaho, for example. I know guys that just slay giants down there, but they're out in the wide open desert flats, and man, there's something to be said about hunting that terrain as well. But it doesn't always have to be alpine, top of the mountain. It's just kind of what we think of when we think of early season stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I can't thank you enough for taking the time and divulging all your secrets. So, Remi, I'm sorry that you have to find a bunch of new spots now because you just gave up all the.
That's okay.
All the good stuff.
They'll be like, "That's the best buck I've ever seen. Where'd you get that?" I was like, "Oh, I was in the pivot field." You guys drove past it.
That's where Remi really is, right on the edges of those pivots.
No, but awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Well. Hope everybody enjoyed this one. Like I said, I know I did. If you got any questions, definitely, or any topics that you want to hear from us, please let us know. And other than that, signing off. Goodbye, everybody.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. Leave us a review or comment down below. We want to hear what you have to say about the show, maybe what you like, maybe what you didn't like, so that way we can make these podcasts as good as they can be. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'll be posting about each episode released, so that way you can go back, find these things, maybe grab a little nugget of information that you could take with you to the range, out in the field, or maybe to the kitchen if we're talking about some good food. So, again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.